In a straightforward and uncaring manner, Peter made it clear that he expected me to handle all household chores, care responsibilities, and essentially serve as the household's maid. He didn't mince words, directly linking my role to that of domestic help. His stance was clear: either conform to his expectations or leave through divorce, a notion he seemed to wield as a threat. He justified his demands by claiming they were the natural responsibilities of a wife, bluntly suggesting that any objection to this would render me unfit for the role and subject to separation. Understanding the gravity of his words, I stood my ground. Despite Peter's belittling attitude, I reminded him of my significant achievements and contributions, particularly highlighting my successful career at a prestigious company, contrasting sharply with his struggles to maintain a modest restaurant, which thrived largely due to my support. Resolute, I faced Peter, making it clear that his conditions were unacceptable, effectively ending his control over me with a quiet declaration of his dismissal from my life. I am Abigail, a 33-year-old who proudly runs a restaurant that was once my father's legacy. Taking the helm at 25, right after college, was no small feat. Despite my degree in economics, the transition from academia to the realities of managing a business was filled with learning curves and challenges. Yet, with the dedication of our long-serving chef and staff, we've maintained the restaurant's reputation and quality, a testament to hard work and a bit of fortune. Peter, who would later become my husband, initially visited the restaurant as part of his job with a major food company. His frequent visits turned into a regular patronage, drawn by our distinctive flavors. Despite the restaurant's unconventional location, its culinary excellence had cultivated a loyal following over the years. Peter was well-educated and successful, a stark contrast to my own world. Yet, his down-to-earth nature and charm quickly won me over, leading to a relationship that I once believed was grounded in mutual respect and admiration. However, the unfolding events revealed a starkly different reality, prompting a re-evaluation of our relationship and my stand against being reduced to a mere role within the confines of our home. I always believed that my feelings for him were one-sided, just a simple tale of a restaurant owner and a loyal patron. Yet unexpectedly, he opened his heart to me. "Abigail, would you consider going out with me with the intention of marriage?" he asked. My world spun with joy. It was as though a miracle had unfolded before me. His confession was like a scene from a romantic novel, where the knight in shining armor declares his love for the maiden. Overwhelmed and elated, I accepted his proposal without hesitation, enchanted by the prospect of our fairy tale future together. 2 years later, I became Peter's wife, but the enchanting fairy tale soon transformed into a somber narrative. The warmth and affection that once defined our relationship faded, replaced by a cold, transactional dynamic. Peter, who once addressed me with endearment, adopted a stern and commanding tone. "You're my wife now. You understand what that entails, right?" he said. His sudden demand for respect and submission took me by surprise, marking a stark departure from the man I thought I knew. His expectations were clear. I was to embody the perfect wife, a role that seemed to prioritize subservience over partnership. Peter's demeanor shifted drastically, from a loving partner to a demanding authoritarian. He insisted on molding me into a wife that matched his high standards, emphasizing the need for impeccable housekeeping and unwavering respect. This new version of Peter was unrecognizable, a far cry from the charming man who had won my heart. He positioned himself as an elite, expecting me to conform to his ideal without question. The pressure to maintain a flawless home was immense. Peter's insistence on a tidy house at all times was a stark contrast to the lively, albeit chaotic, home I grew up in. My family's life had always revolved around our restaurant, leaving little time for domestic perfection. Despite my attempts to meet his demands, Peter dismissed my efforts, labeling any plea for assistance as an excuse. The suggestion of hiring a housekeeper to manage the workload was met with disdain. Peter saw no value in investing in help, viewing a wife's labor as cost-free. His blunt assertion that my role was essentially that of free labor shattered any illusions of partnership or mutual respect. It became painfully clear that my contributions and the significance of my restaurant were minimized, if not outright disregarded, in his eyes. The restaurant, a symbol of my family's legacy and my personal dedication, held little value to Peter. His casual suggestion to dispose of it if it became unprofitable revealed a lack of understanding and appreciation for what it represented to me. His conditional support, framed as a generous allowance for my hobby, only deepened the rift between us. As the reality of our marriage unfolded, the prospect of divorce became an increasingly viable path. The stark contrast between the man I fell in love with and the person he revealed himself to be left me contemplating the future of our relationship, questioning the sustainability of a marriage built on unequal expectations and a lack of genuine support. Despite everything, a part of me still held on to love for Peter, intertwined with a strong desire to prove him wrong and make him see and regret his actions. This complicated mix of emotions drove me to pour my heart and soul into my restaurant. It's a quaint place, cherished by our regulars, standing as a testament to the unique and nostalgic flavors that large chain restaurants can't replicate. My dedication to preserving this essence of my restaurant was unwavering, even as I tried to navigate a tumultuous marriage with Peter. Peter, ever the skeptic, occasionally remarked on my efforts, almost in disbelief that the restaurant was still operational. He flippantly suggested that as long as I managed the household duties, I could keep my restaurant. Unbeknownst to him, balancing both had become my daily routine. My morning started before dawn, preparing breakfast for Peter before he headed off to work, followed by a day filled with managing the restaurant. Evenings were spent cooking dinner, cleaning, and preparing everything for Peter's return, all while ensuring our home remained pristine to avoid giving him any reason to force me to quit my passion. Sacrificing sleep and meticulously organizing every aspect of my day, I strived to keep both my professional and personal life in order. Peter held a constant threat over my head, hinting at the possibility of making me give up the restaurant if I ever let our home's standards slip. It became clear to me that Peter saw our marriage not as a partnership, but as a means to gain a dedicated servant, along with the added bonus of my restaurant's assets. Reflecting on the past, it dawned on me that Peter had probably chosen me because he believed I would never stand up to him, given my deep affections. His feigned surprise at my dedication to the restaurant and his claim of feeling betrayed by my continued success and independence were both ironic and hurtful. He had expected my undivided attention post-marriage, not realizing or perhaps ignoring that I had ambitions and responsibilities of my own. The situation took a turn for the worse when my mother suffered an injury and had to be hospitalized. Peter's parents, living in a neighboring state, were much like him, proud and dismissive. They looked down on me and my family, viewing us as inferior due to our connection to the service industry. Their elitist attitude was clear from the outset, suggesting I should be grateful for being chosen by Peter, and advising me to show more respect and subservience to match my fortunate position. They even went as far as to imply that Peter could have married someone from a more prestigious background, reinforcing their belief that worth and dignity are measured by corporate success rather than personal integrity or hard work. Peter occasionally seemed to defend me in their presence, suggesting my youth and background were areas for potential growth rather than fixed shortcomings. However, as time passed, it became apparent that these defenses were superficial, designed to placate rather than protect. His parents' continuous belittlement and Peter's failure to genuinely stand by me revealed the true dynamics of our relationship and his family's values. It was a painful realization that, despite my efforts and love for Peter, the respect and understanding I hoped for were conditional, predicated on conforming to their narrow view of success and subservience. Despite my strained relationship with Peter's mother, her injury was undeniably unfortunate. I felt a basic sense of duty to visit her at the hospital. However, Peter's expectations soon took me by surprise. He explained that after her surgery and subsequent hospital stay, his mother would need to undergo rehabilitation and that I was expected to care for her. This revelation was shocking, especially when he clarified that this caregiving would take place in our home, with his parents moving in with us after his mother's discharge. The thought alone was overwhelming. The dynamics of living with Peter were challenging enough, but the prospect of cohabiting with his demanding parents was entirely out of the question for me. I stood my ground, refusing to take on the role of caregiver. I argued that professional caregivers were a more suitable option for his mother's needs, given my commitments to running my restaurant. Peter's response was dismissive and outrageous. He suggested I should quit my restaurant, sell it, and use the proceeds for his family's needs. His words reduced me to nothing more than household help, making it clear that he viewed me merely as a source of free labor, including for his mother's care. His ultimatum was stark: conform to these expectations or leave. with divorce presented as a looming threat. His smug demeanor indicated he believed he had cornered me into submission. However, I was not intimidated. I quietly affirmed my position and achievements, contrasting sharply with his demeaning view of my restaurant. Without further argument, I internally dismissed him from my life, though he seemed not to catch my whispered dismissal. Peter mistook my silence for acquiescence, assuming I would comply with his demands given some time. He was mistaken. Over the past 3 years, I had been preparing for such a moment, albeit with a lingering hope that Peter might revert to the loving man I had married. Yet, faced with the continuous erosion of our relationship and his unchanging attitude, I realized that hope was futile. It was time for decisive action. I reached out for help, making a call to initiate my next steps. 2 months later, the economic section of the newspaper featured a surprising development. Peter's employer, a food manufacturing company, was on the verge of being acquired by a restaurant group. Peter, caught off guard and visibly upset by the news, could not fathom the implications of this turn of events. This strategic move marked the beginning of a new chapter, one where I reclaimed my autonomy and challenged the dynamics that Peter had sought to impose on me. Peter was incredulous, watching as his world seemed to unravel before him. "This is ridiculous. We're a leading company, and now we're being taken over by some random diner group?" He vented his frustration by crumpling the newspaper and throwing it against the wall, disbelief etched on his face as he turned on the TV, only to find the same news confirmed. Slumping onto the sofa, Peter's agitation was palpable. "Why is this happening?" he muttered, grappling with the reality of the situation. It was in this moment of vulnerability that I approached him, offering something that visibly shocked him. "What is this?" Peter asked, eyes wide as he held the divorce papers I handed him. His reaction was to crumple and discard them as he had with the newspaper, but I remained steadfast. "No matter how much you crumple these, we can't return to how things were," I said, prompting him to demand an explanation for the divorce. Peter was taken aback by my decision, especially since he had been the one to mention divorce first, albeit as a so-called figure of speech meant to manipulate me into compliance. His silence was answer enough when I confronted him with the truth of our situation. I loved him once, trusted him, but the repeated betrayals and deceptions made divorce the only path forward for me. Peter looked at the new set of divorce papers I placed in front of him, disbelief turning to desperation. "This is a lie, right? You wouldn't do this," he pleaded, unable to accept the reality that I was serious about ending our marriage. His plea for another chance, even as tears streamed down his face, couldn't erase the hurt and disrespect I had endured. "Why not? We loved each other, didn't we? We can start over," he implored, grasping for a sliver of hope. But it was too late. My decision was final. "I've given up on you. That's why I decided to buy your company," I revealed, leaving Peter dumbfounded. The restaurant group that acquired his company was a large corporation, boasting 2,500 full-time employees, a fact that underscored the depth of my resolve and the extent of my capabilities beyond what Peter had ever acknowledged or respected. The realization that I, the woman he had underestimated and reduced to a mere housemaid, had orchestrated such a significant move was a turning point. It signified not just the end of our marriage, but also a dramatic shift in power dynamics, marking a new beginning for me and the closure of a chapter defined by disregard and manipulation. In a moment filled with high stakes and emotions, I informed Peter, "I'm actually the president of that company, and given the circumstances, you're fired." Peter's laughter echoed in disbelief, thinking it a joke, but the reality was far from humorous. Shifting the conversation, I handed him an envelope, its contents eliciting a shocked outcry from him. Inside were detailed documents and photographs, clear evidence of Peter's numerous affairs, gathered meticulously by a private investigator. The range of individuals involved was staggering, showcasing Peter's misuse of his charm and status. The evidence was undeniable, spanning various liaisons, some even during what were meant to be professional commitments. Peter's face drained of color as he struggled to form words, his shock palpable. He attempted to deflect, accusing me of using his finances for the investigation, which I promptly corrected. Despite his perception of me as merely the proprietor of a struggling restaurant, I was about to unveil a much grander narrative. I explained that the restaurant, perceived by Peter as a failing venture, was, in fact, the cornerstone of a substantial information-gathering operation focused on understanding market trends and customer preferences. This modest establishment, initiated by my father, had grown into a global chain, the same entity responsible for acquiring Peter's company. Peter was stunned, unable to reconcile this revelation with his prior assumptions. I elaborated on the strategic importance of the restaurant's location for market research, which played a crucial role in the expansion of our family business to a major chain with international presence. As Peter grappled with this newfound knowledge, he accused me of deceit. However, I clarified that my silence was based on my father's advice to observe Peter's character, particularly after marriage, a test he failed, revealing his unchanged nature. This revelation was not just about my hidden business acumen, but also about Peter's failure to recognize the depth of the person he married. I shared how my father's illness necessitated a shift in leadership within our family business, contradicting Peter's assumptions of my role as merely stepping in due to a health crisis. This conversation marked a turning point, not only in our personal relationship but in Peter's professional life as well, revealing a complex narrative of ambition, betrayal, and strategic foresight. Fresh out of college, I stepped into a role much larger than I had ever anticipated. Being young and newly graduated with a degree in business management didn't fully prepare me for the monumental task of running a restaurant, let alone being seen as a CEO. My father, aware of my inexperience, sternly cautioned me about the heavy responsibility. He made it clear that failure would not only tarnish the family legacy, but also disqualify me from being recognized as his rightful successor. He also advised against marrying hastily, fearing a stranger might seize control or damage the business. Despite these warnings, I held a strong belief that Peter would be different, that he would respect my commitment and share in my values. This belief led me to keep silent about my true role and the stakes involved, hoping to prove both my capability and trustworthiness. However, Peter's actions betrayed my trust, echoing my father's foresight that if Peter proved unworthy, I should take matters into my own hands. Running a major corporation required decisiveness and the ability to address personal betrayals head-on. So, for 3 years, I harbored the hope of Peter showing remorse and changing his ways. Yet, as time passed, the realization dawned that I needed to act. After making a decisive phone call, I awaited the arrival of the next crucial step in my plan. The doorbell soon rang, and I opened the door to reveal the former president of Peter's company, which was now under my ownership. The air was tense as the former president, with a strained smile, handed Peter a termination notice. It was an official document outlining his dismissal for disciplinary reasons, including misusing company time and funds. In a strategic move, I had offered the former president a chance to retain his position in exchange for enforcing Peter's termination. Peter's actions, seen as minor individually, accumulated into a significant breach of trust and professional misconduct. I made it clear to Peter that his dismissal was deserved, urging him to leave what he thought was our shared home. His confusion deepened when I revealed that the apartment was actually owned by me, a fact he had overlooked or forgotten. This moment wasn't just about ending Peter's employment. It was a declaration of my independence and a step towards reclaiming my life and future from the shadows of betrayal and unmet expectations. With the lease expired last month, Peter found himself without any legal right to remain in the apartment. I was firm in my decision not to renew our arrangement. As Peter stood there, bewildered by the swift turn of events, I mentioned the need to sort through our belongings and decide on the division of property. However, my immediate concern was to not have him in my presence any longer. I suggested he return to his parents' home, especially with his mother nearing her discharge from the hospital after a month-long stay. It seemed like the most logical step for him to prepare for her return. I made it clear to Peter that any further communication regarding our separation would be handled through a lawyer. Handing him over to the former president, I warned that any attempt to return would be reported as trespassing. Although we were not officially divorced yet, the landlord's stance was clear. Peter had no place here anymore. Silently, Peter left the apartment, his departure marking the beginning of a new chapter for both of us. The aftermath involved dealing with incessant calls from Peter's parents, who were initially unaware of the extent of our problems. When they learned about the impending divorce, their tone shifted dramatically. Initially, they tried to appeal to my sense of family, insinuating that the divorce was an overreaction to what they deemed minor indiscretions. However, as I remained adamant about my decision, their pleas turned into threats and accusations, blaming me for Peter's unemployment and demanding alimony as compensation. Despite their emotional manipulation and attempts to guilt-trip me, I stood firm on my decision to divorce Peter. Their change in tactic, from threats to apologies, did not sway me. I had already communicated my boundaries clearly. If their harassment persisted, legal action would be my next step. Following through with this, a warning from my lawyer finally put an end to their attempts to contact me. In the property settlement, I ensured that alimony was claimed from Peter, securing what was rightfully mine. This process was not just about ending a marriage, but about asserting my independence and closing a chapter filled with betrayal and manipulation. It was a reaffirmation of my right to a life free from deceit and a step towards moving forward on my own terms. Fortunately, due to Peter's previously solid financial status, all outstanding payments were settled. However, Peter's circumstances drastically changed after losing his job and depleting his savings, leading him to move back in with his parents. Now he spends his days working long hours in the service sector, a field he previously dismissed. Adding to his challenges, Peter faces alimony lawsuits from the husbands of the women he was involved with. It's a tough situation, but I hope he takes responsibility and works diligently to fulfill these obligations, no matter how long it may take. In conversations with the women involved, each expressed regret, clarifying they were drawn to Peter for his status and wealth, rather than genuine affection. I emphasized the seriousness of their actions, engaging in relationships with a married man, and the legal consequences that follow. Through these discussions, I arranged for them to contribute a fair amount in alimony, hoping this ordeal serves as a lesson to avoid similar mistakes in the future. I've now officially assumed the role of president, taking over from my uncle, who has stepped into the chairman position. While my father's health has improved, he remains unable to work. Nonetheless, his morale has been boosted significantly since I took charge of the company. His occasional advice is something I cherish deeply, providing guidance as I navigate my new responsibilities. My foremost wish is for my parents to enjoy a long and healthy life, free from the stress and worry my previous relationship caused. My father's growing recognition of my capabilities as a business owner is a source of personal pride. Looking ahead, I'm open to the possibility of meeting someone who brings peace and happiness to my family. However, for the time being, I'm focusing on my commitment to remaining single and dedicating myself to the growth of the company. It feels like my true calling, nurturing this child of mine to become larger and more esteemed. The restaurant, the origin of both my parents' journey and my own, holds a special place in my heart. It symbolizes my beginnings and the values instilled in me. As I continue to manage it alongside my responsibilities as president, it remains a cherished reminder of where I started and the legacy I aim to build upon. My journey is just beginning, but I'm optimistic about the future and the successes that lie ahead.